It was supposed to be her moment. Another scalp for her collection. Another viral takedown expertly clipped and blasted across social media, energizing her base and dominating the news cycle. The C-SPAN cameras captured everything as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez rose from her seat on the House Oversight Committee. Her crimson blazer wasn't just clothing, it was a declaration of war against the muted wood-paneled walls of the hearing room. A visual siren demanding attention. She adjusted her microphone with the practiced ease of a performer who knew her lines, knew her audience, and knew the impact she was about to make. She'd done this dozens of times before, transforming dry congressional hearings into must-see political theater. Moments that reverberated online for days. Today, she clearly believed, would be no different. The gallery was packed, a physical manifestation of her online army. Progressive activists filled the visitor seats. Their homemade signs, "Protect Democracy," "Stop MAGA FBI," "No Fascists in Law Enforcement," held aloft like devotional banners. Their phones were already out, recording, thumbs hovering over the share button, ready to capture the moment their hero demolished another Trump appointee. This wasn't just a hearing, it was content creation. Seated at the witness table, Dan Bongino looked remarkably, almost unnervingly, calm for someone about to be ritually sacrificed on the altar of viral politics. Navy suit, crisp white shirt, wire-rimmed reading glasses perched on his nose, he projected an air of quiet competence. The impassive mask of a man who had faced far greater threats than rhetorical barbs. His thick folder lay closed before him, beside a single glass of water he hadn't touched. The former Secret Service agent, a veteran of protecting presidents and investigating federal crimes, had agreed to testify at his own FBI Deputy Director confirmation hearing. It wasn't required, the position didn't need Senate confirmation, but he'd insisted. Transparency, he'd told reporters outside, let the American people see for themselves. Now, watching AOC prepare her attack, the coiled energy palpable across the room, some wondered if that insistence on transparency had been a fatal mistake. Had he willingly walked into his own ambush? "Mr. Bongino," AOC began, her voice carrying that distinctive, instantly recognizable blend of millennial cadence and weaponized indignation that had catapulted her to political stardom. "You've spent the last several years building a media empire on conspiracy theories, election denial, and COVID misinformation." She paused, letting the indictment hang in the air. A prosecutor laying out the charges. "You've called the FBI corrupt," she continued, ticking off the offenses, "said our elections were rigged, promoted dangerous falsehoods about vaccines and public health measures. YouTube permanently banned you for spreading misinformation." The progressive gallery nodded along, murmurs of affirmation rippling through the rows. This was the narrative they came for. "You ran for Congress 3 times. AOC pressed on, twisting the knife, and lost every single race. Then you pivoted to conservative media, where you've made millions, attacking the very institutions you now claim to want to serve." She leaned forward, her expression hardening, zeroing in for the kill. "So here's my question, Mr. Bongino. How can the American people possibly trust that you won't weaponize the FBI against President Trump's political enemies? How can anyone believe you'll uphold the law fairly when you've spent years undermining faith in our democratic institutions?" The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. AOC's chief of staff, seated directly behind her, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. This was going perfectly. The clips would be everywhere by dinner. Committee Chairman James Comer, a Republican from Kentucky, banged his gavel once. "The Congresswoman's time." "I'm not finished," AOC interrupted. "A signature move, assert dominance. Control the room. Play by her rules." Comer frowned but, perhaps sensing the optics, didn't object. "The American people deserve answers. Mr. Bongino," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "Before we allow someone with your record anywhere near federal law enforcement, they deserve to know, will you serve the Constitution? Or will you serve Donald Trump's political agenda?" She sat back, the very picture of righteous defiance. The gallery burst into sustained applause. Activists were already posting clips. "AOC destroys Trump's FBI pick. Watch her demolish this MAGA nominee." In the press section, reporters typed furiously. This was the soundbite. This was the story. Another successful hunt for the social media lioness. Dan Bongino waited. He let the applause wash over the room. He let the reporters finish their initial takes. He took a slow, measured breath, not nervous, just controlled. 12 years in the Secret Service teaches you patience under fire. It teaches you that the person who stays calm usually wins. Rush to respond, and you make mistakes. Wait, assess, then strike. When the room finally quieted, he looked up, making direct eye contact with AOC across the committee room. "Congresswoman," he said, his Brooklyn accent unmistakable but his tone utterly professional. "Those are serious allegations." He paused, letting the weight of her words settle, subtly validating their gravity before pivoting. "They deserve serious responses, based on facts, not rhetoric." He reached down and opened the folder in front of him. The movement was deliberate, unhurried. Inside, visible even from a distance, were hundreds of pages, documents, photos, printouts, everything organized with the meticulous precision of a federal investigator. This was not a prop, it was an arsenal. "But before we discuss my record," he continued, looking back up at her, the calm demeanor still intact but now underscored by a glint of steel. "Perhaps we should discuss yours." The room went still. You could have heard a pin drop. AOC's confident smile flickered, then vanished. "Excuse me? You've questioned my ethics, my accountability, my fitness to serve," Bongino stated, matter-of-factly. He removed his reading glasses, setting them carefully aside. His next words came quieter, which somehow made them infinitely more powerful. "Fair enough. So let's examine your understanding of those concepts." He flipped to a tabbed section in his folder. The C-SPAN cameras zoomed in, capturing the undeniable evidence of preparation. He hadn't come to react, he'd come to prosecute. "Let's start," Bongino said, looking directly at her, his voice even, his gaze unwavering. "With the Met Gala. The game had just changed. The hunter had just become the hunted." "The Met Gala?" AOC repeated, attempting a dismissive scoff, but the earlier certainty in her voice had vanished, replaced by a brittle edge. "What does that have to do with anything?" The shift in her body language was subtle but telling, a slight stiffening, a tightening around the eyes. She knew this was dangerous territory. AOC's chief of staff, who had been smiling just moments before, now sat bolt upright. Behind the dais, Democratic committee members exchanged uneasy glances. In the gallery, the palpable energy of the progressive activists shifted from righteous anger to confused silence. Even they seemed to sense the ground shifting beneath their champion. A retired NYPD officer who'd worked with Bongino whispered to his wife, "Here we go. That's the Dan I remember. Always prepared." "Everything," Bongino interrupted gently, but firmly. "It has everything to do with ethics. With accountability. With whether someone practices what they preach." He reached into his folder and pulled out a photograph, holding it up so the C-SPAN cameras could capture it clearly. It was the image that had launched 1,000 think pieces. AOC at the 2021 Met Gala. Resplendent in a custom-designed white gown. The words, "Tax the Rich," emblazoned in bold red letters across the back. "Beautiful dress," Bongino commented, his tone neutral, almost appreciative. "This photo went viral, didn't it? Millions of views. Everyone talking about your bold statement. Taking the message directly to the elite." He set the photo down on the witness table. Still clearly visible. Powerful political theater. "I'll give you that." He paused, letting the image, and its inherent message, hang in the air. This wasn't just a dress, it was a brand statement. The very essence of AOC's public persona. "But, Congresswoman," Bongino continued, the edge returning to his voice, "here's what I find interesting. What nobody seemed to ask at the time." He looked up at her again, his gaze steady. "Who paid for that dress?" The question was simple, direct, and devastating. It cut through the political messaging straight to the underlying transaction. AOC opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. That's been addressed." "The Ethics Committee?" "Yes." Bongino nodded, acknowledging her point before immediately seizing control of it. "The Ethics Committee. We'll get to their findings in a moment. But first, let's walk through what actually happened. Because the American people deserve to know the full story, not just the curated highlights." He pulled out another document. The cameras zoomed in. It was an official House Ethics Committee report. The recent publication date clearly visible. This wasn't speculation, it was sourced. Official documentation. You attended one of the most exclusive, opulent events in the world. Bongino narrated, laying out the facts like exhibits in a trial. Tickets cost tens of thousands of dollars, more than most Americans make in a year. You wore a custom designer gown. You had your hair and makeup professionally done. You stayed in a luxury hotel. All very glamorous. His voice remained level, factual, but the implication was clear. This was the world of the elite she so often railed against. And all of it, Bongino stated, the dress, the styling, the hotel, everything, was given to you. Free, complimentary, because you're a celebrity politician. In the gallery, people were leaning forward now. The progressive activists had stopped checking their phones. Even they wanted to hear this. Now, Bongino continued, members of Congress have rules about gifts. Everyone knows this. You can't accept expensive gifts, worth thousands of dollars, from private parties, especially those seeking to influence policy. It's Ethics 101. Basic stuff. He tapped the Ethics Committee report on the table. So, what did you do, Congresswoman? Silence. AOC stared straight ahead. Her face flushed. You wore the dress. Bongino answered for her. You enjoyed the party. You posed for all those viral photos, reaping the political benefits. Then you went home, and you did nothing. That's not. AOC tried to interrupt. Months went by. Bongino continued, his voice never rising but somehow filling the room, painting a picture of deliberate neglect. Fall became winter. Winter became spring. Those vendors, the designer who created the dress, the stylist who did your hair, the hotel that provided the room, they were still waiting for payment. Small businesses, some of them, Congresswoman, waiting for a champion of the working class to pay her bills. He leaned back slightly, letting the hypocrisy land. You only paid, or rather, arrangements were only made for payment, after the Office of Congressional Ethics started asking questions. Not because you suddenly remembered your ethical obligations. Because you got caught. The room erupted, but not in applause this time. Republicans were nodding vigorously. Even some Democrats looked deeply uncomfortable. In the gallery, Maria Rodriguez, the progressive activist, had stopped her live stream. The narrative had shattered. How could she spin this? I paid everything back, AOC insisted, her voice tight. The Ethics Committee cleared. The Ethics Committee, Bongino interrupted calmly, holding up the report again, found that you violated House rules. They concluded, and I quote directly from their findings, Representative Ocasio-Cortez received impermissible gifts associated with her attendance at the Met Gala. He set the report down, looking at her with an expression that bordered on pity. You wore a dress that said, tax the rich, while accepting thousands of dollars worth of free luxury goods and services from the fashion industry, an industry notorious for exploiting labor. You made vendors wait months for payment while you enjoyed the fruits of their labor. And you only made it right when investigators came knocking. His voice dropped lower, becoming almost intimate, yet carrying through the hushed room. Tell me, Congresswoman, what do you call that? The gallery had gone completely silent. The confident, almost joyous energy from AOC's opening attack had evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. This wasn't going how anyone expected. Congressional reporter Jake Sherman was typing furiously. Holy asterisk asterisk asterisk. Bongino came prepared. This is not the hearing we thought it would be. Hashtag AOC hashtag Bongino. Within minutes, different clips would be going viral, not AOC's attack, but Bongino's methodical dismantling. AOC tried to recover, falling back on legalistic defenses. The Ethics Committee did not find that I knowingly violated. Because you hired expensive lawyers. Bongino countered smoothly, who argued, quite effectively, I might add, that you didn't mean to break the rules. That you were just negligent, overwhelmed, perhaps ignorant of the specifics, not malicious. A classic defense. He tilted his head slightly. The prosecutor zeroing in, but Congresswoman, when you question my fitness to serve, my character, my judgment, you're making a character argument. You're saying my ethics are questionable. That I can't be trusted with power because of my past statements and actions. He paused, letting his next words land with maximum impact. So, let me ask you the same question you asked me. How can the American people trust someone who taxed the rich, while accepting free luxury goods? How can anyone believe you'll hold others accountable when you didn't hold yourself accountable until you got caught? The room exploded again. Republicans were nodding, some even murmuring, exactly. Democrats were shifting uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Chairman Comer had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore a semblance of order. But the damage was done. Bongino hadn't just defended himself, he had turned AOC's own weapon, the weapon of ethical purity and righteous indignation, directly against her. And drawn blood. And Bongino wasn't finished. He flipped to another tabbed section in his still thick folder. And that, he said quietly, looking directly at AOC, is just the first thing I want to discuss. Because there's more, much more. AOC's hands were gripping the table now. Her knuckles white, her chief of staff leaned forward again, whispering urgently in her ear. She shook her head, trying desperately to maintain composure. But the damage from the Met Gala revelation was palpable. The air of invincibility had vanished. In the gallery, the retired NYPD officer whispered to his wife again. I told you, when Dan has that folder, it's over. He's like a dog with a bone. Progressive activist Maria Rodriguez looked at her phone. The comments on her now paused stream turning hostile. Wait, is this true? Did she really do that? Why didn't she pay right away? She had no answers. This wasn't in the script. Bongino, sensing the shift, pressed his advantage, moving seamlessly to his next exhibit. He reached for his phone, holding it up so the committee and the cameras could see the screen clearly. Recognize this? He asked, his voice still even but now carrying an unmistakable weight. On the screen was a photograph, actually. A series of photographs, depicting heartbreaking squalor. A house with a ceiling partially collapsed. Water damage staining the walls like old wounds. Buckets positioned strategically to catch drips from above. It was an image of neglect, of disaster's lingering aftermath. Your grandmother's house in Puerto Rico. Bongino stated, not as a question, but as a fact. You posted these photos online a couple of years back, after Hurricane Maria. AOC's expression tightened, a flicker of recognition, then dread. She knew exactly where this was going. Heartbreaking photos, Bongino continued, his tone conveying genuine sympathy, which made the subsequent turn all the more brutal. Really emotional. Your grandmother, your abuela, still living in these conditions years after the hurricane. Ceiling falling apart, water damage everywhere. He swiped to show another image from AOC's original social media post, a caption filled with righteous anger. And you blamed President Trump. Said he'd blocked relief funds. That Puerto Ricans were being abandoned. Left to suffer. Bongino set his phone down, face up on the witness table. The image of the damaged ceiling still starkly visible. Powerful message. Those photos went viral. Millions saw them. Everyone felt terrible for your abuela. For all the Puerto Ricans still suffering under those conditions. He paused, letting that shared sympathy, that collective outrage AOC had so effectively generated, settle back into the room. And then, Bongino said, his voice taking on a narrative quality. Something interesting happened. From his folder, he pulled out printed screenshots, social media posts, news articles, the methodical presentation of a trained investigator laying out a sequence of events. A conservative commentator named Matt Walsh, you know him, I think, saw your post. Bongino continued, and he had a different reaction. He read from one of the printouts. Shameful that AOC lives in luxury while allowing her own grandmother to suffer in these squalid conditions. AOC's face flushed crimson. That's a completely unfair. Is it? Bongino asked simply, the question hanging like a guillotine blade. Let's examine that. He pulled out more documents. Because Matt Walsh did something more than just tweet. He started a fundraiser. Said if the government won't help, regular Americans will. He called it, Save AOC's Abuela's Ancestral Home. The room was utterly silent again. Completely drawn into the unfolding story. This wasn't just about hypocrisy anymore, it was about something deeper. Something far more personal. And you want to know what happened? Bongino asked, his voice carrying genuine emotion now. Regular Americans opened their wallets. Grandmothers sending $5, whatever they could spare. Veterans on fixed incomes donating $10. Working families. People who probably needed that money themselves. Chipping in. He held up screenshots showing the GoFundMe page. The rapidly rising total. The comments filled with goodwill. They didn't care about politics in that moment. Bongino said, his voice thick with emphasis. They just saw another grandmother suffering and wanted to help. He held up another printout. By the next morning, they had raised over $100. Life-changing money. More than enough to completely repair that house. To make your grandmother safe and comfortable. The cameras captured everything, the documentation. Bongino's earnest expression. AOC's increasingly rigid posture. Walsh reached out to you publicly on Twitter. Bongino continued, laying out the timeline. He sent messages to your office. He said, here's the money for your grandmother. Tell us where to send it. Bongino set down the printout slowly. Deliberately. The weight of his next words palpable. And you said no. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even Chairman Comer looked surprised. You refused it, Bongino repeated, ensuring everyone understood. Every penny. Your family, reportedly acting on your instructions, told GoFundMe they didn't want the money. So it all went back to the donors. Over $100, sent back. Someone in the gallery shouted. Why? Comer banged his gavel once but seemed more interested in the answer than in maintaining strict order. AOC tried to respond. Her voice strained. My grandmother is fine. This was about making a political point about systemic. Your grandmother is fine now. Bongino interrupted, his voice cutting through her spin. But when you posted those photos, you said she was suffering. You said she needed help. You blamed the government for abandoning her. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. And then, when actual help arrived, real money, real assistance, from real people offering genuine charity, you turned it down. Why? Because it came from the wrong political tribe? Because it didn't fit your narrative? His voice hardened. Or was it because accepting that help would undermine your carefully crafted story? Would it prove that maybe, just maybe, President Trump wasn't the only reason your abuela's roof was leaking? The room erupted again. Democrats shouted objections about relevance. Republicans countered loudly. The gallery was in chaos. Comer banged his gavel, trying to restore order. But Bongino's voice cut through the noise. His message delivered with devastating precision. He had just painted AOC not merely as a hypocrite, but as someone willing to let her own grandmother live in squalor rather than compromise a political narrative. He had framed her compassion itself as performance art. As Chairman Comer struggled to regain control, Bongino stood up from the witness table. It was an unusual move in a congressional hearing, instantly commanding attention. He wasn't just presenting evidence anymore, he was making a closing argument on this specific point. Contrasting AOC's political performance with her personal reality. Let me paint another picture for the American people, Bongino said, his voice calm but resonant. He began to walk slowly along the witness table, folder in hand, not pacing aggressively, but moving deliberately, ensuring every eye was on him. You live here, in Washington, D.C., he stated, in one of the fanciest, newest residential buildings in the city, Navy Yard. The kind of place with amenities most Americans only see in luxury magazines. He started listing them, painting a vivid picture of elite urban living, golf simulators, rooftop dog parks, multiple swimming pools, indoor lap pools, outdoor resort-style pools, professional massage rooms, steam rooms, yoga studios, rock climbing walls. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. The stark contrast between these images and the photos of his grandmother's dilapidated house spoke volumes. You drive a luxury electric car, he continued, a Tesla, the kind that costs more than many Americans make in an entire year. He paused. Made by, let me think, oh right, Elon Musk, a billionaire, one of the richest men in the world, the very kind of person you publicly stated shouldn't exist. Some uncomfortable laughter rippled through the gallery. The cognitive dissonance was becoming undeniable. You shop regularly at Whole Foods, Bongino went on, turning another page in the mental file he clearly possessed. Not exactly the budget grocery option. Multiple sources have photographed you there. Another simple statement of fact. Easily verifiable, yet devastating in context. Whole Foods, owned by Amazon. Amazon, run by Jeff Bezos. Another billionaire you've criticized extensively. Whose company you helped block from bringing 25,000 jobs to your own district in Queens. He stopped walking, turning to face AOC directly. The litany of contradictions laid bare. You could have fixed your grandmother's house with 1 month of your congressional salary. 1 month, but you didn't. The silence in the room was absolute. Suffocating. Instead, Bongino summarized, his voice low but carrying. You posted photos for political points. Got your viral moment. Blamed Trump. Then, when thousands of ordinary Americans, people who disagree with you politically, but still possess basic human decency, when they raised real money for your actual grandmother, you sent it back. His voice dropped even lower, becoming almost a whisper, yet filled with controlled anger. So let me ask you, Congresswoman, do you actually care about helping people? Or do you just care about the optics of appearing to care? Maria Rodriguez, the progressive activist in the gallery, had stopped recording entirely. She was staring blankly at her phone, reading the comments flooding her paused stream. Wait, this is real? She refused the money? Why would she do that? That's her grandmother. Maria had no answers. This wasn't just off script, it was a betrayal of the entire movement's narrative. Congressional reporter Jake Sherman was typing furiously. This hearing has become a devastating indictment of AOC. Not a confirmation hearing for Bongino. Stunning reversal. Democrats silent. #AOC #Bongino #ethics. In the committee room, Representative Ocasio-Cortez sat rigidly still. Her earlier fire had been extinguished, replaced by a glacial composure that barely masked the panic underneath. She tried to respond, her voice tight, strained. You don't understand the cultural context in Latino families. I'm from Queens, Bongino interrupted, reclaiming his own working class, outer borough roots. I grew up around Latino families. I know about taking care of elders. I know about family obligations. He walked back towards his seat but remained standing, holding the floor. What I also know is this: if your family member needs help, you help them. You don't post photos for clicks. You don't use their suffering for political messaging. And you sure as hell don't refuse money meant to help them because you don't like where it came from politically. He sat back down, the point made, the contrast drawn. He opened his folder to the next section. But that's not all, he said quietly, because your grandmother isn't the only person you've claimed to care about while living a very different reality. AOC's chief of staff was now urgently whispering to her, his face a mask of frustration. She was shaking her head, visibly annoyed. This was supposed to be her hearing, her moment to shine. Instead, she was being systematically dismantled, point by documented point, by a man who understood evidence, understood preparation, and understood how to build an unshakable case. And that folder, impossibly, still looked thick with material. Bongino took a slow, deliberate sip of water, the first time he'd touched the glass all hearing. It was a calculated pause. A moment to let the weight of the Met Gala hypocrisy and the cruelty of the grandmother incident settle into the room's consciousness. Then, he opened his folder to another tabbed section. Congresswoman, he began, his tone shifting back to the analytical. I spent 12 years as a federal agent in the Secret Service. Before that, NYPD. You know what you learned in that time? He looked up at her. The experienced investigator sharing a trade secret. Patterns. You learn to see patterns. 1 incident might be a mistake. 2 incidents. Maybe that's bad luck. He paused, letting the implication hang. 3 or more? That's not coincidence anymore. That's a pattern. That's who someone really is. He laid out several documents in a neat row on the witness table. Organized. Methodical. So, let's look at the pattern of your career. Not cherry-picking. Just documented facts. He pointed to the first document. The Ethics Committee report. First data point. The Met Gala. You accepted thousands of dollars in expensive, impermissible gifts. You only paid when you got caught. The House Ethics Committee officially found violations. He moved to the next set of documents, the social media screenshots. The GoFundMe records. Second data point. Your grandmother in Puerto Rico. You used her genuine suffering for political points and viral outrage. Then you refused over $100 in actual, tangible help, raised by ordinary Americans. Because it came from political opponents and interfered with your narrative. Meanwhile, you were living in documented luxury yourself. He gestured to the third set of images, the apartment building. The Tesla. The Whole Foods receipts. Third data point. Your lifestyle. A luxury apartment with amenities beyond the reach of 99% of Americans. An expensive electric car made by a billionaire you claim shouldn't exist. Habitual shopping at the high-end grocery store owned by another billionaire whose company you actively tried to harm. Costing your district thousands of jobs. All while building your entire political brand on fighting inequality and representing the working class. He looked up, letting the 3 points form a triangle of hypocrisy. That's 3 clear instances. But, as I said, there's more. He introduced a new document, citing recent news articles and ethics complaints. Let's talk briefly about your campaign spending. Your office expenses. An organization called Americans for Public Trust has filed multiple ethics complaints against you. Want to know why? He didn't wait for her to answer. Taxpayer funds. Campaign funds. Used for questionable expenses. FEC filings showing payments for things listed as dance classes. Payments to consulting groups run by close personal friends that look more personal than professional. AOC started to object, likely to argue the complaints were politically motivated. But Bongino cut her off smoothly. Now, I'm not saying anything illegal was definitively proven yet. I'm saying it's another data point in the pattern. Public funds used in ways that raise serious ethical questions. Just like accepting impermissible gifts. Just like refusing help for your own grandmother. Just like living lavishly while preaching simplicity and austerity for others. He stood again, but this time his energy was different. It wasn't anger, it was a controlled, passionate summation. Here's what the pattern shows. Congresswoman. He walked towards the center of the dais, addressing not just AOC, but the entire committee. The cameras, and the country. You have built a political brand, a very successful one. I might add, on being authentic. On being different from typical politicians. On genuinely, deeply caring about working people and economic justice. He stopped, turning to face her directly. But every actual data point, every documented choice you have made, tells the exact opposite story. The evidence suggests you care primarily about optics. About going viral. About building your brand, not about actually living the values you preach so eloquently. His voice grew more passionate, colored by his own working-class queen's background. You know what really gets me? It's the people who believe in you. The working families who sent you $10, $20 from their tight budgets because they thought you were fighting for them. The young progressives who see you as a hero. Who genuinely believe you're going to change the system. The activists. He gestured towards the now subdued visitor seats. In this very gallery who came here today ready to cheer as you took down another, corrupt, official. His voice resonated with genuine empathy for them. They believe in your message. They want economic justice. They want accountability. They want politicians who actually give a damn about regular people. He paused, his gaze hardening as he turned back to AOC. And you've been lying to them. The accusation hung in the air. Raw and brutal, not necessarily with your words. He clarified, your words are often beautiful, inspirational, exactly what they want to hear. But you've been lying with your actions, with how you actually live your life, with the choices you actually make when the cameras aren't rolling, or when you think no one is looking. The gallery was completely silent now. Some of AOC's remaining supporters looked angry. But the anger wasn't directed at Bongino anymore. They looked confused, hurt, betrayed. Maria Rodriguez had tears streaming down her face. She had volunteered countless hours for AOC's first campaign, knocked on doors in the freezing cold, truly believed in the message. Now, she was seeing verified news articles, ethics violations, refused donations, luxury apartments, and wondering, what had it all been for? I'm not perfect, Congresswoman, Bongino continued, his voice softening slightly but losing none of its firmness. He placed his hand flat on the closed folder. I've never claimed to be. I've made mistakes in my life. I've said things I regret. I've certainly been wrong about stuff. He looked directly at her now. But I have never pretended to be something I'm not. I've never built a career on representing working people while living nothing like them. I've never attacked others for behavior I engage in myself. His voice hardened again, the prosecutor returning for the summation. You questioned my fitness to serve, my ethics, my character. You said I can't be trusted with power because of my past statements and actions. His voice rose slightly, emphasizing the contrast. But based on the documented pattern I have shown here today, the pattern of your words versus your actions, how can you be trusted? How can anyone believe you actually care about the causes you champion when your personal choices consistently undermine your public pronouncements? The room erupted. Republicans were on their feet, applauding. Democrats were in chaos. Some looked furious at Bongino. Others looked furious at AOC for creating this disaster. And a few looked thoughtful, genuinely troubled by the evidence. The gallery was a scene of complete disarray. Arguments breaking out between former allies. Chairman Comer banged his gavel repeatedly, shouting for order, but the dam had broken. Then, cutting through the chaos, came a clear, distinct voice. Point of personal privilege, Mr. Chairman. Representative Josh Gottheimer, a moderate Democrat from New Jersey known for his pragmatism and occasional clashes with the party's progressive wing, stood up. Comer, perhaps sensing an opportunity or perhaps just wanting the noise to stop, recognized him. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized. Mr. Chairman, Gottheimer said, his New Jersey accent sharp and clear. I think we need to address what we've just heard. Seriously. He turned, pointedly looking down the dais towards AOC. These are documented ethics violations presented to this committee. These are patterns of behavior that raise legitimate questions about judgment, about authenticity, and frankly, about respect for the rules of this House. He turned back to Comer. This committee should not be used as a platform for partisan attacks. Especially, he emphasized, when the person launching the attacks has their own serious, unresolved ethical issues to address. The room went utterly silent. A Democrat, not just any Democrat, but a respected member of the caucus, had just publicly broken ranks. He hadn't just failed to defend AOC, he had actively validated Bongino's critique and implicitly rebuked her conduct. Gottheimer continued, his voice firm. I believe in accountability. I believe in ethics, which means I believe in applying the same standards to everyone, including members of my own party. He sat down. The implications were seismic. AOC looked stricken, as if she'd been physically slapped. This wasn't just a Republican attack anymore, it was a bipartisan condemnation fueled by documented evidence. Her shield of progressive righteousness had been shattered. Jake Sherman was typing faster than humanly possible. Holy asterisk asterisk asterisk. Gottheimer just threw AOC under the bus. Cites, documented ethics violations and patterns of behavior. Dems fracturing in real time over AOC's ethical issues. This hearing is unprecedented. #AOC #Bongino #oversight. In the gallery, the whispered debate stopped. Progressives looked stunned. Conservatives looked vindicated but stayed mostly quiet, wisely letting the Democrats tear themselves apart. Bongino remained at the witness table, his expression neutral. He had done his job. He had presented the facts, built the case, and let the evidence speak. Now, the room, the committee, and the political world were doing the rest. AOC tried desperately to regain control, to respond to Gottheimer, to salvage something. This is all just, she began, her voice rising, but then her microphone cut out. A sudden, jarring silence from the usually omnipresent voice. Was it a technical glitch? Was it deliberate? Nobody was sure, but the symbolism was almost too perfect. The voice that had dominated social media, launched 1,000 viral clips, was, in this moment of crisis, literally silenced. Chairman Comer, looking at his watch and perhaps sensing the hearing had reached a point of no return, seemed to make a decision. I think, he said slowly, we've heard enough for today. This hearing is. No, came a voice. It was Bongino. Everyone turned, surprised. Mr. Chairman, with respect, Bongino said quietly but firmly. I'm not done. Comer raised an eyebrow. Mr. Bongino, I believe you've made your point quite effectively. Not yet, Bongino replied, his gaze steady, because there's one more thing the American people need to hear. He opened his folder to the final section, the thickest section by far. One more pattern I need to address. And this one, he paused, his tone shifting, becoming graver, more personal, is the most important. The room held its breath. Something about Bongino's tone had changed. The sharp edge of the prosecutor was gone, replaced by something more personal, more reflective. The room, which had been buzzing with the aftershocks of Gottheimer's rebuke, fell completely still again. Even AOC seemed frozen, waiting. "Congresswoman," Bongino began, his voice softer than before, creating an unexpected intimacy in the cavernous hearing room. "You and we're about the same age. We both came from working-class backgrounds. Queens and the Bronx. Not that different, really." He closed the folder. He didn't need it anymore. This wasn't about documents, it was about character. About choices. About two divergent paths. "We both saw our parents struggle," he continued. "We both understood what it meant to work hard for everything. We both wanted to make a difference." He paused, letting the common ground settle before highlighting the divergence. "But we chose different paths." He stood, but this time it wasn't an aggressive move. It felt more like a professor stepping away from the lectern to speak more directly to his students. "I became a cop, then Secret Service. Spent 12 years protecting Presidents Bush, Obama, Democrats and Republicans. Didn't matter to me. My job was to serve the office. To serve the Constitution. To take a bullet if necessary." He began walking slowly, not towards AOC, but simply moving, holding the room's attention. "I left the service. Ran for Congress 3 times. As you pointed out, lost every time." He smiled slightly. A self-deprecating acknowledgement. "You know what that taught me? Humility. It taught me I wasn't good at politics. That my particular skills lay elsewhere." He stopped walking. "So, I went into media, started a podcast, wrote books, said what I believed. Sometimes I was right, sometimes I was wrong, but I was always honest about who I was and what I believed." He turned, looking directly at the committee members. "I never pretended to be something I'm not. I'm a conservative. I believe in limited government. I question authority. I'm skeptical of institutions when they get too powerful, including the ones I served in." He then turned his gaze back to AOC, his expression serious. "Now, you and I disagree on almost everything politically. And that's fine. That's democracy. We're supposed to disagree, supposed to debate, supposed to hash out different visions for America." His voice got harder, drawing the crucial distinction. "But here's where we're fundamentally different. Congresswoman, when I criticize something, I don't participate in it. When I say government is too big, I don't go looking for government jobs just for the power. When I attack the media establishment, I don't secretly crave their approval or leak stories to them." He paused, letting the implicit accusations land. You've built your entire career on a foundation of inconsistency. On saying one thing and doing another. On attacking the very systems you simultaneously benefit from and exploit." He started counting on his fingers, methodically listing the hypocrisies he documented. 1. You say, tax the rich, while accepting thousands in free luxury gifts from the rich. 2. You say billionaires shouldn't exist while driving their cars and shopping at their stores. 3. You say you represent working people while living a life utterly divorced from their reality. 4. You say Puerto Rico needs help but refuse over $100 in actual aid when it comes because of politics. 5. You attack capitalism while enjoying every single benefit and luxury it provides." All 5 fingers were up. "Now, that's not just hypocrisy, Congresswoman," he stated, his voice resonating with conviction. "That's a fundamental character issue." The room was breathless. This was no longer about policy, it was a dissection of a soul. "And here's what really bothers me," Bongino continued, emotion finally creeping into his voice. Raw and unvarnished. "What bothers me more than the ethics violations? Or the luxury apartment? Or any of it?" He moved closer to his seat but remained standing, leaning forward slightly. "It's the people who believe in you. The people who trust you. The working families who donated their hard-earned money. The young progressives who genuinely see you as their voice. As their hope in Congress." His voice thickened. "They deserve better. They deserve someone who actually lives the values they preach. Who actually makes sacrifices for the causes they champion. Who actually gives a damn about something more than just viral moments and media attention and building their own brand." He sat down finally, but leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I spent 12 years in the Secret Service. Congresswoman, you know what that job teaches you. Above all else, integrity. Real integrity. Not the performative kind you display for the cameras. Not the Instagram kind, perfectly curated. The kind where you actually do the right thing. Day in and day out. Especially when no one is watching. His voice dropped to almost a whisper, forcing everyone in the room, everyone watching at home, to lean in. You questioned my integrity, my ethics, my fitness to serve. He paused, the silence stretching. But I believe I've shown this committee. And I've shown the American people. A documented, undeniable pattern of you saying one thing and doing another. Of you performing outrage while living in luxury. Of you using other people's suffering for political gain while refusing to help them in real ways. He picked up his now closed folder, holding it up almost like a sacred text. This isn't a partisan attack. This is your own actions. Documented and verified. This is the chasm between your rhetoric and your reality. He set it down firmly. So, let me ask you one final question. Congresswoman, he looked directly into her eyes, holding her gaze. When you go home tonight to your luxury apartment, when you plug in your expensive electric car, when you walk down the aisles of Whole Foods tomorrow, will you think, even for a moment, about the working families you claim to represent? Will you think about your grandmother, whose suffering you exploited for clicks? Will you think about the small business vendors you made wait months for payment? He paused, the final blow delivered with devastating quietness. Or will you just think about your next viral moment? The silence that followed was absolute. Complete. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The cameras captured it all. AOC's face, which had gone from red to pale, now seemed utterly blank, stripped bare. Her hands trembled slightly where they rested on the table. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Behind her, her chief of staff looked physically ill. This was catastrophic. There was no spin. There was no recovery. In the gallery, Maria Rodriguez was openly sobbing now, not caring who saw. The comments on her phone screen were a blur of betrayal and anger. Jake Sherman had stopped tweeting altogether. He was just watching, absorbing the historic weight of the moment, the complete, public dismantling of a political superstar, executed not with insults, but with her own life. What happened next would be replayed millions of times, analyzed frame by frame. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the youngest woman ever elected to Congress, the social media titan, the voice of a generation for many, tried one last time to regain control, to salvage something from the wreckage. You don't, she started. But her voice cracked audibly. The microphone caught that tiny break, that involuntary betrayal of her shattered composure. You can't just come in here. She stopped again, took a shallow, shaky breath. Her hands were visibly trembling now. Chairman Comer, perhaps sensing the depth of the collapse, leaned forward, his expression showing something almost like sympathy despite their political differences. Congresswoman, perhaps we should take a recess. No. AOC's voice came out too loud, too sharp. She realized it, tried to moderate. No, I have more questions for the witness. She looked down at her notes, the prepared talking points now seeming utterly irrelevant, like battle plans for a war that had already been lost. How do you attack someone's credibility when yours lies in ruins at your feet? Mr. Bongino, she tried again, her voice steadier but hollow, lacking its earlier power. You've spread misinformation about elections. I've expressed concerns about election integrity. He corrected calmly. Based on documented irregularities. That's not misinformation. That's due diligence. You promoted COVID conspiracy theories. I questioned specific policies, mask efficacy, lockdown necessity, vaccine mandates for the previously infected. Bongino interrupted smoothly. Those aren't conspiracy theories, those are legitimate policy debates, many of which have since been validated. You called the FBI corrupt. I said elements within the FBI had become politicized. Bongino clarified again, easily parrying each weak thrust. Which is why reform is needed. The very reform I plan to implement as deputy director. To make the bureau less political, more focused on actual law enforcement. He tilted his head slightly. Isn't that what you want, Congresswoman? Less politicization of federal agencies? The irony was suffocating. She had tried to use this hearing to score political points, and it had backfired on a scale no one could have imagined. Behind her, her chief of staff leaned forward again, whispering urgently. She shook him off. visibly frustrated. In the gallery, people were starting to leave, some of her own supporters. Unable to watch anymore, their faces a mixture of disillusionment and anger. Maria Rodriguez gathered her things, tears still streaming down her face. She couldn't bear to watch the final moments. Her followers online were already turning on AOC, questioning everything. On social media, the tide had completely, irrevocably reversed. Hashtag AOC exposed. Hashtag Bongino destroys. Hashtag Champagne Socialist were trending globally. The clips weren't just viral, they were thermonuclear. Bongino's calm, factual responses were juxtaposed against AOC's increasing desperation. Even media outlets typically sympathetic to AOC were struggling to find a positive spin. Difficult day for Representative Ocasio-Cortez as ethics questions resurface. Read in MSNBC Chiron. AOC's past ethics violations come under scrutiny. Headlined The Washington Post. Back in the hearing room, AOC made one final, futile attempt. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion, "I move to. Your time has expired, Congresswoman," Comer said firmly but not unkindly. "And frankly, I think this committee has heard enough." He looked around the room. Mr. Bongino has answered the Congresswoman's questions, and then some. He has provided extensive documentation of issues that this committee may need to address separately. The implication was clear. AOC's ethics problems weren't going away, they had just been elevated to an official concern. "Unless there are other questions for the witness," Comer continued, "I move to conclude this hearing." Silence. No one dared follow AOC's disaster. Hearing none, Comer declared, "This committee stands adjourned." The gavel banged. It was over. AOC sat motionless, staring at her useless notes. The red blazer seemed garish now against her pale, drawn face. Her chief of staff gently touched her shoulder. She flinched, then stood, gathering her papers with shaking hands. As she walked towards the exit, reporters swarmed, shouting questions she couldn't, or wouldn't, answer. Dan Bongino, meanwhile, calmly packed his folder. He shook hands with committee members from both parties. Even some Democrats approached him quietly, thanking him for his testimony. Their expressions a mixture of respect and political calculation. When he finally headed towards the exit, reporters mobbed him too. "Mr. Bongino, how do you feel?" "I came here to answer questions about my fitness to serve," he said carefully. "Instead, I had to address attacks from someone with their own documented ethical issues. I hope the American people saw that facts matter. Documentation matters. Living your values matters." He started to walk away, then turned back, adding a final, masterful touch, reaching out to her disillusioned base. To the people who believed in Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's message, you weren't wrong to want change. To want accountability, you were just wrong about her. But that doesn't mean your values are wrong. It means you deserve better representatives, ones who actually practice what they preach. Within hours, the political world was reeling. Bongino's confirmation, once uncertain, was now virtually guaranteed, with even moderate Democrats like Joe Manchin signaling support. AOC's squad colleagues issued carefully worded statements, distancing themselves. Democratic leadership remained pointedly silent. Ethics investigations were formally announced. Polls showed a cratering of public trust in AOC, even among Democrats. The narrative had been irrevocably shattered. The image of AOC as the authentic, incorruptible champion of the working class had been demolished, replaced by the reality documented in Bongino's folder. A politician whose actions consistently betrayed her words. The hearing would be studied for years, a masterclass in preparation, documentation, and the devastating power of exposing hypocrisy. It was a reminder that in the unforgiving glare of the digital age, authenticity isn't just a buzzword, it's a requirement. Performative politics had met methodical accountability, and accountability had won.